News today in the Carmelo Anthony case. The Collin County DA, his name is Greg Willis, is speaking out for the first time since Carmelo Anthony filed this motion for a new trial. They filed it right away after the conviction. It was July 7th they filed. As a reminder, last month, a jury rejected Carmelo's self-defense arguments. They found him guilty of murdering 17-year-old Austin Metcalf after stabbing Austin in the chest for no apparent reason at a track and field meet in April of last year down in Frisco, Texas. Both of the boys were 17 at the time of the stabbing. That same jury sentenced Carmelo to 35 years in prison. Then Carmelo got a brand new legal team right after the conviction. And one of the arguments the brand new legal team is making on appeal is that they want a new trial.
The flashing lights reflected across the pavement long after the crowd had disappeared. What had begun as a high school track meet ended with a teenager dead, another facing a murder charge, and two families whose lives would never be the same. Within hours, investigators were collecting evidence, witnesses were giving conflicting accounts, and a single violent confrontation had become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the country. As the months passed, the courtroom became the new battleground. Every filing, every hearing, and every procedural dispute was scrutinized by the public. Then came another controversy. Defense attorneys claimed prosecutors had broken what they described as a gentleman's agreement regarding the timing of certain evidence disclosures and legal filings. Prosecutors, however, disputed the characterization, adding another layer of tension to an already emotional case. While that disagreement centered on legal procedure rather than the facts of the fatal encounter itself, it became another example of how even seemingly small courtroom decisions could shape public perception of a case under an intense national spotlight. This is the story of the death of Austin Metcalf and the criminal case against Karmelo Anthony. It is a case filled with grief, conflicting witness accounts, legal strategy, and a justice system working through every detail under extraordinary public attention. Throughout this series, we'll separate verified facts from speculation, following court records and publicly documented proceedings while avoiding rumors that have spread online. Before examining the courtroom dispute now making headlines, it's important to understand how two teenagers who had never expected their names to become national news ended up at the center of a tragedy. On the morning of April 2, 2025, students from across North Texas gathered for what should have been a celebration of athletic competition. Schools arrived with coaches, teammates, parents, and supporters. The atmosphere reflected countless other track meets held every spring, competitors preparing for races, field events beginning, and families filling the stands with cameras and encouragement. Among those students was 17-year-old Austin Metcalf, remembered by those who knew him as an accomplished athlete and a dedicated student. Friends described someone who enjoyed competing, valued teamwork, and looked forward to his future. Like many teenagers nearing graduation, he was focused on balancing school, athletics, friendships, and the opportunities waiting beyond high school. Also attending the meet was 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony from another school district. Until that day, he was simply another student-athlete participating in the competition. Nothing about the morning suggested that the event would soon become the subject of national headlines, legal analysis, and endless debate across television and social media. According to investigators, a disagreement developed between the two teenagers near the seating area designated for athletes. Witnesses later provided varying descriptions of exactly how the confrontation unfolded, but investigators have consistently maintained that the disagreement escalated rapidly. Within moments, the encounter turned violent. Emergency responders rushed to the scene as bystanders struggled to comprehend what had happened. Medical personnel attempted life-saving measures before Austin was transported for emergency treatment. Despite those efforts, he later died from his injuries. Police secured the area, interviewed witnesses, collected physical evidence, and began reconstructing the sequence of events. As investigators worked, rumors spread almost instantly across social media. Claims, Counterclaims, edited videos, and unverified narratives flooded the internet before many official facts had even been released. Authorities soon arrested Karmelo Anthony and charged him with murder. From that moment forward, the legal process, not social media speculation, would determine how the evidence would ultimately be evaluated. As investigators continued building their case, defense attorneys also began preparing theirs, indicating that self-defense would become a central issue. Court hearings, motions, and procedural disputes would follow for months, eventually leading to one of the latest controversies: allegations from the defense that prosecutors had violated a so-called gentleman's agreement during the pretrial process. Whether that disagreement represented a serious breach or simply a routine dispute between opposing counsel would ultimately be for the court to evaluate. But by then, the tragedy had already transformed into something much larger than a single courtroom battle. It had become a case watched by millions, one where every filing, every hearing, and every legal decision would be examined through the lens of a heartbreaking loss that could never be undone. In the days after the fatal confrontation, investigators began piecing together the backgrounds of the two teenagers at the center of the case. What emerged was not a story of lifelong enemies or a history of escalating conflict. According to investigators, Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony attended different schools and had no known prior relationship before the track meet. Their paths crossed only because of a sporting event that was supposed to celebrate competition and teamwork. Austin was remembered by family, friends, and classmates as a dedicated student-athlete who enjoyed football and track. Those who knew him described him as hardworking, competitive, and deeply connected to his family. His death left an enormous void, with loved ones struggling to comprehend how an ordinary school event could end in unimaginable tragedy. Karmelo Anthony, also 17 at the time, was known as a student-athlete in his own community. After his arrest, his defense team emphasized that he was entitled to the presumption of innocence and indicated they intended to argue that he acted in self-defense. As with any criminal case, that claim would ultimately be evaluated in court based on the evidence presented, not public opinion or social media commentary. As emotions intensified nationwide, the case quickly became more than a local tragedy. Every court filing, hearing, and legal motion drew widespread attention, while online speculation often raced ahead of verified facts. Before we continue, if you appreciate fact-based true crime coverage that focuses on evidence rather than rumors, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest investigations. With national attention growing by the day, the legal battle was only beginning, and behind the scenes, a series of procedural disputes would soon raise new questions about how the case was being handled. As the investigation progressed, attention shifted from the crime scene to the growing collection of evidence. Detectives interviewed students, coaches, first responders, and anyone who might have witnessed the confrontation. Each account added another piece to the timeline, though not every witness described the encounter in exactly the same way. Investigators were tasked with separating perception from fact, carefully comparing statements against the physical evidence. According to court records and public filings, the defense signaled early that self-defense would be central to its case. Prosecutors, however, maintained that the evidence supported the murder charge. Those competing narratives would shape nearly every pretrial hearing that followed. Outside the courtroom, the case generated intense public debate. Short video clips, social media posts, and online commentary spread rapidly, often presenting incomplete or unverified versions of events. Attorneys on both sides repeatedly urged that the case be judged on evidence presented in court rather than internet speculation. As public interest grew, so did scrutiny of every legal filing and procedural decision. One of the latest points of contention involved the defense's claim that prosecutors had violated what they described as a gentleman's agreement concerning the handling or timing of certain pretrial matters. While the defense argued that the understanding had been broken, prosecutors disputed that characterization. The disagreement centered on legal procedure rather than establishing guilt or innocence, and the court would ultimately determine whether any remedy was appropriate. By then, it had become clear that this case would not be decided by headlines or online arguments. Every motion, every piece of evidence, and every ruling would be examined under the strict rules of the courtroom, where facts, not speculation, carry the greatest weight. The tragedy itself unfolded in only a matter of moments, yet its consequences would last forever. According to investigators, the confrontation began during the high school track meet after a disagreement in an area where athletes had gathered. Witnesses later gave varying accounts about exactly how the exchange escalated, but investigators concluded that what started as a verbal dispute quickly became physical. Court records indicate that Karmelo Anthony admitted to stabbing Austin Metcalf during the confrontation. The central legal issue, however, is not whether the stabbing occurred, but whether it was a criminal act or one committed in lawful self-defense. The defense has argued that Anthony feared for his safety and acted to protect himself. Prosecutors, on the other hand, contend that the evidence does not support that justification. Those competing claims remain for the court and, ultimately, a jury to evaluate. As emergency responders rushed to the scene, students, coaches, and parents watched in disbelief. Medical personnel immediately attempted life-saving measures before Austin was transported for emergency treatment. Despite those efforts, he later died from his injuries, leaving his family facing an unimaginable loss. Investigators quickly secured the area, photographed the scene, collected physical evidence, and began documenting witness statements while memories were still fresh. Every detail, from the location of those involved to the sequence of events, became critical in reconstructing what happened. The fatal encounter lasted only minutes, but the questions surrounding those minutes would dominate months of legal proceedings. Determining exactly how the confrontation unfolded, what each participant perceived, and whether the law supports the claim of self-defense would become the heart of one of the most closely watched criminal cases in recent memory. As investigators continued building their case, the focus expanded beyond the crime scene to the evidence that could either strengthen or challenge each side's version of events. Detectives reviewed witness statements, examined physical evidence, and analyzed digital material collected during the investigation. Every piece of information had to be tested against the timeline to determine what was supported by facts rather than assumptions. The prosecution maintained that the evidence justified moving forward with the murder charge. The defense, meanwhile, continued preparing its self-defense argument and challenged aspects of the prosecution's handling of the case through a series of pretrial motions. One of the most publicized disputes arose when defense attorneys alleged that prosecutors had violated what they called a gentleman's agreement concerning the timing or handling of certain pretrial matters. Prosecutors disputed that characterization, arguing that they had complied with their legal obligations. As of those filings, the disagreement concerned courtroom procedure and did not resolve the ultimate question of guilt or innocence. The court was left to evaluate those competing claims under the rules governing criminal proceedings. While such procedural disputes are not uncommon in major criminal cases, the intense public attention surrounding this one amplified every motion and hearing. Outside the courtroom, public interest remained extraordinarily high. Social media continued to circulate theories and opinions, but investigators and attorneys repeatedly emphasized that the case would be decided by admissible evidence presented in court, not by online commentary. If you're following this case for careful, evidence-based coverage, please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue producing factual true crime documentaries that separate verified information from speculation. With pretrial disputes mounting, the courtroom was preparing for the next phase, a legal battle where every decision could influence the course of the trial itself. As the case moved deeper into the court system, every hearing carried enormous significance. Before a jury could ever hear the evidence, attorneys on both sides argued over what information should be admitted, how evidence had been collected, and whether legal procedures had been properly followed. These pretrial proceedings rarely attract national attention, but in this case, nearly every motion became headline news. The defense continued to argue that Karmelo Anthony acted in self-defense, maintaining that the evidence would ultimately support that position at trial. Prosecutors, however, remained committed to the murder charge, asserting that the facts gathered during the investigation justified presenting the case to a jury. At this stage of the proceedings, the court's role was not to determine guilt or innocence, but to ensure that the trial would proceed fairly and in accordance with the law. Among the issues debated were evidence disclosure, scheduling, and other procedural matters, including the defense's allegation that prosecutors had broken a so-called gentleman's agreement. Prosecutors disputed that claim, leaving the judge to resolve the disagreement based on the applicable legal standards rather than public opinion. Because the criminal case remained pending, no verdict had been reached and no sentence had been imposed. The ultimate outcome would depend on the evidence presented in court, the credibility of witnesses, the judge's legal rulings, and, if the case proceeded to trial, the jury's evaluation of all admissible evidence. For both families, the legal process represented more than a series of hearings. It was a search for answers in the aftermath of an irreversible tragedy. While the courtroom could determine legal responsibility, it could never erase the pain left behind by the events of that day, nor could it restore the future that was lost. Long before the court reaches its final decision, the emotional consequences of this case have already reshaped countless lives. For Austin Metcalf's family, the loss was immediate and permanent. They have publicly remembered him as a young man with ambitions, strong family bonds, and a love for athletics. In interviews and public statements, they have spoken about the overwhelming grief of losing a son and brother under such tragic circumstances, while expressing their hope that the legal process will provide accountability. The case has also profoundly affected Karmelo Anthony's family. As criminal proceedings continued, they publicly supported him while emphasizing that he deserves the same constitutional rights afforded to every defendant, including the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in court. The attention surrounding the case brought intense public scrutiny to both families, with many urging restraint and respect while the judicial process unfolds. Beyond the families, the tragedy resonated throughout the schools and communities connected to the two teenagers. Students, teachers, coaches, and classmates were forced to confront the reality that a routine athletic event had ended in violence. Memorials, moments of reflection, and messages of support highlighted the deep impact the loss had on those who knew Austin personally, while many also expressed concern for the lasting effects on everyone who witnessed the incident. The case has sparked broader conversations about conflict resolution, school safety, youth violence, and the influence of social media on high-profile criminal cases. While opinions remain deeply divided, one truth is shared across every perspective: two families have been forever changed. As the legal process continues, the search for justice remains intertwined with the hope that lessons can be learned from a tragedy that can never be undone. As this case continues through the justice system, one fact remains beyond dispute. A teenager lost his life, another faces a murder charge, and two families have been permanently changed. Long after the headlines fade and the courtroom empties, the consequences of that day will continue to shape everyone connected to it. The legal arguments, including the defense's allegation that prosecutors broke a gentleman's agreement, and the prosecution's disagreement with that characterization are important because they reflect how criminal cases are tested under the rules of law. But those procedural disputes should not be confused with the ultimate question the court must answer: whether the evidence proves the charge beyond a reasonable doubt or supports the defense's claim of self-defense. That determination belongs to the court, guided by the evidence and the law, not by public opinion or online speculation. Cases like this remind us that justice is often a long and complicated process. Every motion, every hearing, and every ruling is designed to ensure that the outcome is based on facts, fairness, and due process. Whatever the final verdict may be, it cannot undo the pain experienced by those whose lives were forever altered. As the proceedings continue, the nation watches, waiting for answers that only the courtroom can provide. What do you believe is the most important lesson this tragedy teaches about conflict, accountability, and the justice system? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If you found this documentary informative, please like this video, share it with others, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next in-depth true crime investigation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.